Hi, I'm resident of Collinwood for YouTube. That's my buddy Patrick McCray. That's my buddy Gordon Dymowski. That's my buddy Alan Gallant. We're here to talk Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze. Really excellent movie. So, guys, when did they first really? Gordon might know this. Gordon, when did they first announce this movie?
It was actually first announced and released around 75. Um, and the reason I know this is that my first introduction to Doc Savage was when I was about 7, 8 years old. Headed up to the Brighton Park branch of the Chicago Public Library, and they had along one wall they had basically had all their paperbacks, and I pulled one that looked intriguing called The Man of Bronze. Read that. My mother, for my birthday that year, had purchased the Doc Savage black and white magazine, and Marvel had just started publishing Doc Savage comic books. So it came out around that time. I didn't see it until maybe high school because it wasn't on TV all that much. But no, I grew up reading all the paperback reprints, and uh, really reconnected when they started doing the newer novels by Bantam in the 90s.
When did you guys first see this movie? The year it came out, or?
Oh no, I was 4. I mean, it's a movie I could have gone to see,
Yeah.
but it wasn't really on the radar for me. I think I started hearing about it in the background, but it just sounded like some sort of macho He-Man type thing and I had a friend of mine, probably around 1986, 86 or 87, who was a huge Doc Savage fan. I mean, he was literally huge. He was about 6'7", 6'8". It's a rogue comic book artist named Bill Levy. Interesting guy. And Bill, for him, Doc Savage just began and ended it all. John Lennon said it all begins and ends with Elvis. For Bill, it all began and ended with Doc Savage. And he had some very deep philosophical reasons as to why. It was a fascinating conversation to have with him. And so he really encouraged me to, we would go to flea markets, and when he would see a Doc Savage book, he'd say, "You need to pick that up." And they were like 25 cents. So it was easy to get the Bantam paperbacks. And this was in the golden age of used books, when you could really get good deals for nothing. Nothing. I mean, just stacks of books. And these had not yet been seized upon by collectors. So they were only about 10 years out of print or so. And so I read them, and Doc Savage is one of those things where I fell in love with the idea of it, really more than any execution, at least until Philip Jose Farmer wrote Escape from Loki. Because Lester Dent was an okay writer. He was very good at formulaic stuff, and occasionally, and he was very good with action. But, like any author of that period, it could be a little creaky. And but the idea of Doc Savage and the Fabulous Five, the ideas inside that were so cool that it kept me coming back. And so I saw this movie about a year into reading the Doc Savage stuff, and I was happy it existed. I was also appalled at some of the stylistic choices. The John Philip Sousa music, down to putting the USA of Sousa in red, white, and blue. It's like, yeah, I get it. And the deviations from the novel, where all of them are wrong-headed choices, but there is such a good nature in the movie. And if you parse through some of the line readings, and some of the music, which enhances those line readings, that is a little too winky at the audience, and you just take it on its own terms, like when Doc is giving the oath, which was the thing that kids got in the Doc Savage Club that they could join when it was, back in the 40s, the late 30s, early 40s, when it was at its heyday. if you sort of looked at it through the eyes of a kid in 1946, it becomes a very different film, and it becomes a really endearing movie. You have to take it on deeper terms than even the filmmakers had. My suspicion, and Gordon, you might correct me on this, but my suspicion is that they were faced with some severe budget constraints, and so when faced with that, how could they make a success out of it? Well, maybe we'll go the Batman route and kind of wink at the audience with this stuff, because he is, post Vietnam. The sense of heroism had not yet been revived by Richard Lester and George Lucas, and so this is what we had. There's a questionable belief that heroism could even exist, and the movie still manages to rise above that, and I love that about it.
Mm-hmm.
So So I saw the movie probably I was about 15.
Yeah, I think, to be fair to the movie, had this movie come out in the mid 60s, because there was work on a Doc Savage movie at that time that went through, if we would be looking at this as a very earnest, very solid, yet sometimes creaky film.
Yes.
This was the last production by George Pal, and George Pal, as a filmmaker, was a very earnest, very upbeat guy. And I think this is like in his heyday, late 50s, early 60s,
Yes.
he could thrive. In the mid 70s, he produced this. It was directed by Michael Anderson, who brought us Logan's Run. So I think there's a real, and I think there's a little bit more of a studio interference factor,
Yes.
where it's the right it's a combination of things that just don't fit. And for the longest time, this movie made me wince, because it's there. Some of that stuff was really painful to watch. Now I can see it as, first, there are a couple of fan edits that came out in the early 2000s that really kind of massaged some of the things through, so it wasn't as, there's an actual plot to it. But I think what makes this movie work for me is Ron Eli's performance.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the main thing that keeps me coming back. And some of the scenes, I think, they may not be like the books did it, but I think if you're going to do an adaptation of Doc Savage, this is about as close as you're going to come to getting the spirit of it accurate.
There is really authentic affection for the source material, even if they do it in some weird ways sometimes. I do feel like there's authentic affection for the source material, and there's authentic affection between the characters,
Mm-hmm.
especially the six leads in the movie. And that came through more than anything in this film, watching the Fabulous Five interact, and that it's clear that this ensemble was carefully assembled. And I would like to think, because it seems that way, that these are five actors, six with Ron, who really got along.
Mm-hmm.
That reads, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but they successfully convey that impression.
Alan, what did you think?
I appreciated the attempt at. There's some definite parodic elements in this that for me it was like it could have gone further. It's like Thurston Howell III was a producer that stole a first draft of King Solomon's Mines that was done by Mel Brooks, and then did it on the set of partially on the set of Gilligan's Island, because that whole second half of the movie takes place in this
jungle. Oh God, they're really stuck there.
Stuff, and it gave me the sense. I get the fond love letter to the genre and all of that sort of thing. It also gave me the sense that there was like too many chiefs in the soup pot about how are we going to do this, because there's a wink and a nod here, but then there's the dialogue that doesn't quite go over the edge where maybe it should, or should go slightly differently. I think that they needed a little bit of dialogue work, but I appreciated what the characters were doing and the whole, late 30s kind of atmosphere that the whole thing was doing. I mean, it was made in the 70s, so you get what you got in the 60s with hairstyles in westerns. You get anachronisms, and some of the costumes looked really good, and then others like had giant freight cuffs and looked 70s.
Oh,
So you had that. I mean, I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that, but I thought that there was some inconsistencies with the way it was put together in terms of the thrust of the script and what it was trying to make itself into. Performance-wise, it at once justified and killed Ron Ely's career, I think, because it kept him in a place where he'd been with Tarzan just a few years before. It kept him there. But at the same time, to be fair to Ron Ely, he also does a really good job with that lighthearted sort of wink and a nod at the audience kind of thing. That works well, and I think it would have worked better with another draft of the script. I just think it would have worked
yeah.
better.
Ron Ely's very good in the movie.
Yes, but I think it didn't serve his career as well as it would have if it had been just a little bit more polished, I think.
Yeah, he ended up as a game show host, and then fortunately a mystery writer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, as an author, he did. I think he did pretty well. I mean, I think he was. I mean, it wasn't. He didn't become the Stephen King of mysteries, but I think he did okay with that.
But he didn't become the Ron Ely of mysteries either.
He didn't.
You know what I mean?
That's right. He didn't. He didn't have to swing on a vine half naked through conventions. I think he's a guy that always struck me as being able to maintain his dignity throughout whatever material he had.
I mean, it would have livened up ABA tremendously, but it never happened.
But I just think the only thing that holds it back is it can't quite make up, and I think this is because of like a bunch of writers and producers punching it out. It can't quite make up its mind to commit itself to completely.
One of the things when I look at the difference between this and Batman, especially season 1 Batman, which is when it was firing on all cylinders, is that Batman knew it was kind of like Pee-wee's Playhouse. It was, yes, it was camp, and it was camp for adults that just happened to be appropriate enough for kids.
Yeah.
But, you still had one pole thicker than the other with the label Dick on it and things like that.
Yeah,
that, obviously was meant for adults.
But they knew how to toe that line, and the writers and producers, I think, had envisioned it. So that they had a template, and they said, "Here's what we can do."
But this seemed to, if it has a fault in its camp, and I say all of this with the caveat that I like this movie. This is just getting in under the hood in
this movie. As somebody who's written dialogue before, I would have liked to have some of it be a little bit snappier and momentum.
What I was going to say is that it. I think had it been written squarely for adults, but not in an adult fashion, it would have been better. But I think it suffered because it said, "Oh, let's do the Batman thing, and let's make sure it's always appropriate for kids." And the thing is that if you do something that's appropriate for kids, you don't need to camp it up. You can allow it to be a little bit more sincere. And again, it's that question of commitment, Alan. That you said. It's like, okay, which movie, if you're going to be a comedy, go for the throat. And give us some Zucker and Abrams. And I know I'm coming dangerously close to Monday morning quarterbacking, and I don't mean to. I'm just looking at its where it works and where it could work more, because I love Doc Savage and I want it to work as well as possible.
It's it's of its time too. I mean, it's very it has the nostalgia sensibility of a 70s movie. They do get parts of that right. They do get parts of that feeling of an earlier era very, very much right. And there are certain scenes that are just absolutely flabbergastingly joyful to watch.
Yes.
The whole switcheroo with the airplane and
Yes.
that kind of stuff is great. It's fabulous. And that's committing to something, almost absurd. It's almost, but it's not quite. It's still got that earnestness in it that you talked about before.
Yeah.
So,
as going in as somebody who's never read 1 ounce of Doc Savage or seen this movie prior,
there's no bronze in your veins.
This movie has excellent symbolism. You have the scene in the apartment where there's a sniper across the street, and one of Doc Savage's crew steps in front, not knowing there's a sniper, and you get the thing in the cave later on where there's a green death. Any one of these men at any given time, knowingly or not, would take a bullet for the other.
You bet.
Yes.
And
that's one of the best message. These men who were in a foxhole together at one point in time, it's strange, as I watched this movie, I kept envisioning these men in a foxhole together.
Mm-hmm.
And it sold me on that. And the actors did a hell of a job of selling their characters. Every one of them.
It's a really fine ensemble. I immediately bought how important Doc was to them and how important they were for each other. The way they treat Johnny when he comes in off the street and he's been knocked around. That concern is very genuine. The regret that Rennie and Ham have when they can't go on the mission, and the mature way that Doc is like, hey, look, you got lives to lead. The Doc is, at no point is Doc a bombastic, quote unquote, boss, because he's not. One of the things that I think gets emphasized in the film, but is important to say, is that each of these men are, with the exception of one person in the world, the absolute best in the world at what they do. The finest lawyer, the most learned, bravest archaeologist, the most inventive electronics genius, the most visionary Howard Rourke-like structural engineer, and the most futuristically insightful chemist,
and yet very humbly human, and
they're normal guys,
and not embarrassed to be sort of to make a mistake here and there, and then to correct them, sort of self-correct.
And that normalizes Doc, because you are in this film, you are literally the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only human, the only person in each of their fields who's somewhat better than they are is Doc
Savage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he shows that too, even throughout the movie, where he's standing on that boat and the guy with the gun, and he points it at Doc Savage and shoots him, and you see the bullet hole, like the bullet holes, because he's got a vest on. Vest on. I love that scene. It's so powerful as a character without actually showing, like, knocking over 10 guys. You know what I mean? It gives you that sense of, this guy's a hero.
You know why Gerard Stiles couldn't have done that? Because he had a vest off.
It's true.
Sorry. I'm not proud of that.
Jordan, God.
I'm glad you brought me back into this, because I was starting to wonder what I should do. Should I stay? Should I go? Or should I do a reading from this James Patterson Shadow novel?
God, that James Patterson. Now he did the same thing to Doc Savage, right?
Right.
Is that it? That's the Shadow.
That's the Shadow.
No, this is the Shadow.
Oh God, that Ultimate Assassin or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't touched it. But now that we've gotten the big heavy academic, academic stuff out of the way, One of the things, I think this is a movie that was made at the wrong time. If you made it in the mid 60s, you would have had like a decent, it would have been decent because it would have fit with everything that was going on. If you had made this in, say, like the late 70s or early 80s, as you're starting to begin that crest of like, less political, but more kind of, rah-rah America things, I think it would have fit. I think part of the issue was that you had, by this point, all Doc Savage was, historically, Doc Savage is kind of the ground zero for pop culture. Like if you look at the big three of Street and Smith, The Shadow, Doc Savage, and The Avenger, that's kind of where you get a ton. It's the Wold Newton of popular culture. Now, Joel, do you know what Wold Newton is?
Nope.
This is
Okay,
really cool. As a Dark Shadows fan, you're going to like this.
Okay. So there's a writer by the name of Philip J. Farmer, who's a big pulp guy. He created this literary theory called the Wold Newton universe, which is like the idea is there's this town called Wold Newton. An asteroid hits the Earth at this particular conjuncture, and there are all these families around in England. This asteroid gives off radiation that increases. It's basically it gives people not superpowers, but that makes them a little bit more, a little bit better than normal humans. So one set of ancestors leads to the Shadow. Another set leads to Batman. Another leads to, so it's kind of like in Dark Shadows, the Collins family. You've got all these nice little, interesting little theories about what's going on, like who's Oscar Collins, for example. Why is Joshua at one point introduced as Benjamin? It's that nice kind of commingling. And one of my colleagues, who's a protege of Philip J. Farmer, named Winscott Eckert, has continued some of that in what's known as the Wold Newton crossover universe, which is not just literature, but introducing television and movies into the mix. If you Google it, you can find the website. But there's some really great essays. Like one essay is an interesting exploration of the Wild Wild West. You've got in the TV series, you've got James West and Artemis Gordon. In the movie, you've got James West and Artemis Gordon. How do you reconcile those in the same fictional universe? It's kind of like now the truth is you don't, because that Will Smith Wild Wild West movie sucks ass. It sucks on toast. You don't want, but the explanation was the Secret Service has a variety of paired field agents, and they use James West and Artemis Gordon as code names. So you can have one pair doing something, you can have another pair doing it. And so with Doc Savage, he's probably the one that's always cited. So now, Joel, you're a big Shadow fan. Do you know the circumstances of how the actual pulp was created?
I know that the Walter B. Gibson, there were issues of copyright because there were other people using that weren't necessarily the Shadow. Gibson it was the Depression. Gibson was writing the Shadow, and he was the Depression proof of writing the Shadow. That I know.
Well, the Shadow was actually created for a radio show called Detective Story Weekly by Street and Smith, and it was basically all they had was the name, the Shadow, and the who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. So to your point, they said, hey, let's create a character to get the copyright. And so they hire Walter B. Gibson because they know he's a good writer. And he, the dude could type 4 pages a day. That's like, that's the equivalent of watching all 1,245 episodes of Dark Shadows in 30 days. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see you do that, Patrick.
I have a plan to do that. I have it mapped out.
45 days, humbug, right?
Okay, and so in about a year, they see the Shadow going in, and the Shadow, there are obvious kind of inspirations. And, you've got the Spider, you've got the Black Bat, you've got C-listers like the Crimson Mask and the Purple Scar. So like they know they're starting to see like the mockbuster version of the Shadow. And in 32, Street so says, we should do a hero, but we should do him the opposite of the Shadow. And so they look at a historical figure named Richard Henry Savage. And they go, okay. And they, I think it's John Nanovic, who's the editor, worked with Walter Gibson. He worked with Lester Dent, he was a gadget guy. He also owned a boat. And he was a very prolific writer. His big trick was to have 3 typewriters lined up so that if he gets bored on one story, he types another. And so I'd like to, again, it's like if imagine if Patrick's got 3 screens with Dark Shadows, he gets bored with episode like 261, so he moves to 794, and then like to 1015 because that's the only way he's going to do it in 30 days. But so they invent Doc Savage, who takes off.
That's a great put yourself on some kind of psychological medication as well. I think to view Dark Shadows on 3 separate screens. It's just like,
and so years later, John Nanovic is like, okay, we want to do a character who is a combination of the Shadow and Doc Savage. And so they go to a writer named Paul Ernst, who again is, a lot of these pulp guys, they do have their own distinctive styles, and Ernst is a very tight writer. He earned his writing reputation, writing things like he wrote a lot of like weird horror and weird tales. And so the Avengers, a gentleman by the name of Richard Henry Benson, who he's on a plane with his wife and child. He goes to like the back to use the bathroom. He comes out. His wife and kid are gone. He's attacked, and his skin turns white. And so he assembles his own team, and he forms a company called Justice Incorporated, which is, it's like if you watch Leverage, it's basically the same. It's same premise. People come to him, they hire him, and he's armed with a knife and a gun. Mike and Ike, basically. And his rule is, I will not kill. Like at one point he shoots a bad guy and he says, and the bullet creases the guy's skull. And Benson says, yeah, that bullet creased your skull. It takes a lot of skill to just crease your skull. And his attitude towards, and Benson's attitude was also, he would say things like, I'm not going to kill them, but hey, if they killed each other because of what we do, not bothered by it. And the Avenger pulps were very notable in that two of the Avengers aides were named Josh and Isabel, and they were a black couple. And for pulps at that time, we're talking the mid-30s, that was a radical idea. And their thing was they could do the, they knew when to do, they would, and Ernst never wrote it as like a stereotype, but they knew when to play dumb and to play kind of the typical black person. But then they were also very smart. They trained at Tuskegee. And so Doc Savage is kind of like the, like he and the Shadow are probably the two big, they're the ones who probably had the biggest impact on popular culture. And so for Doc Savage at this time, a lot of it was driven by the fact that after James Bond, a lot of publishers were looking at who do we re-release so that we can get, what do we have that's like James Bond? Well, we've got all this Doc Savage stuff. Let's re-release those because we can earn the money. Because Bantam had then bought the rights to Dark Shadows, and now they're owned by Condé Nast. And so this was, this is what makes this movie a bit really disappointing for me is it's not that there's a lot of missed opportunities, but at this point, there was in 72, 73, there's the beginning of the kind of the nostalgia revival where older people are like, oh, this Vietnam thing, the hippies, the kids. Let's
And we
go
went
back to the old
Happy
days.
Days and things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
It's like, Jewel, when you posted your video about in one of the Facebook groups about giving Mark Perry's Dark Shadows pitch a chance, and one person came at you with like, oh, I don't want to see it. Oh, it's going to be too woke, too DEI. So let me say this publicly to that person. And I wish I was going to do it I wish I'd written it on Facebook, but I didn't want to get you in trouble. So to that person, I just want to say I really would encourage you to see your doctor, because I think you need to have your head removed from your posterior. It's 2024. It's a different world. And guess what? If there are changes to Dark Shadows and there's a new Dark Shadows, it's not like they're going to delete all the old videos. It'll still be there. And when you use words like woke and DEI, you're kind of, I hate to say it, but you're not putting yourself in a good light, and you're kind of saying
you're
what
kind
you're
of
about.
exposing yourself in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if you want to, and you know what, I'm part of the same Dark Shadows group as Jewel is. If you want to address me, come at me. Come at me. I don't know if you're a bro or a sis, but yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Let's rumble.
Let's
dance.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's go back to Doc Savage.
I do have a Doc Savage question for you, Gordon. Was there ever talks during the initial Shadow and Savage run of a crossover?
There was talk. It never happened. But there have been two things that have happened since then. One was that one of the Shadow Popes, the Golden Vulture, is a Walter Gibson rewrite of a Lester Dent novel. Lester Dent wrote a Shadow, and it wasn't like Walter Gibson just like changed some words around. Like, it's basically a page one rewrite. But in recent years, an author named Will Murray has, he is the executor of the Lester Dent estate. He's done a lot of spin-off novels, and he's actually done 2 Shadow Doc Savage crossover novels.
Yeah.
And you can find them on Amazon. One is kind of the Shadows in the background and Doc Savage is here, and they're not really meeting. They're just kind of working at opposite ends. And the other is the kind of, okay, yeah, it's go time.
He's currently doing the Spider as well, isn't he?
Yes, he's okay. Will Murray. I casually know him through my pulpness, and he's done Doc Savage. He does the Spider.
Remo Williams.
He actually jump started the Destroyer revival in the 90s. And so he's done Sherlock Holmes stories. He invented a Marvel character with Steve Ditko.
Nice.
And so Jewel, a couple episodes ago when you gave me a hard time, I was kind of like, I know Will Murray. Like, he and I are not besties, but yeah, we're in similar orbits.
I hear you. With this movie, I really like the effects we got. I like how they did the green snakes. By the way, I looked this up. They're basing this off the Eastern mamba, because there was I looked up green venomous snakes, and the Eastern mambas are green, and they look close to what this is. Really, really interesting how they did this. Really nice. What did you guys think of the effects here?
Very straightforward, very, very not too overly complex, obviously, for the time, but not needing to be, really. I mean, the idea is the actor sells it, and the effect itself is very, very straightforward. And then you have I guess you got some stop action going on in order for the bites to suddenly appear and things like that. But however they did that was probably fairly straightforward as well. But the idea there is, of course, the actors are selling it, the drama of it, the death or the near death experiences that they're having, and all of that sort of thing. So
yeah, and the fact that it's just plain cell animation with a little bit of stop motion, I think it worked perfectly. Like, if you did that in CGI, it would just it would be someone going, "Oh, let me see how detailed I can make the snakes." But
get too cute. Yeah, it would get too cute, too precious.
Patrick, what did you think?
That was okay. I mean, it's representing a disease, and in the books, it's a virus that's or a bacteria that's loose, the Green Death, and so it kind of anthropomorphizing them, I guess, but not the anthro, I guess, biopomorphizing them or something. It's okay. I mean, it's a cartoon. It's people, running from a cartoon, and it's imaginative, and I think the younger the viewer, the more that works because it's never really explained as to what this is entirely.
It's attributed to some sort of a supernatural ritual. I mean,
Yeah,
the venom of the snake, and they perform the ritual, and it becomes this thing. So
sure.
I think
Okay.
as a first-time watcher of the movie, I took it was maybe initially done for sacrifices, or am I off here?
Well, we don't. I mean, the Green Death in the book is just one of the ways that the village defends itself, I think.
Yeah.
It's defense against enemies. That's where they refer to it in the movie.
And to be fair, Joel, the way this was written was that Palin, somebody else had written a script where they put all what they remembered about Doc Savage into the screenplay, and they said, "Yeah, this is a little too much. Let's make this the second movie." And so he wrote this movie based on memories of the Man of Bronze. So it's not it would be like if somebody said, "Oh, okay, well, if somebody wrote a Dark Shadows story, but they only remember it from when it was initially aired." So it's like, okay, we're going to get Barnabas, and we're going to his brother Quentin, and they're going to do like weird stuff in a graveyard. Maybe there's a go-go dancer.
Yeah,
that's a good movie.
Matthew Morgan is still alive and in there somewhere. Yeah, Burt Devlin. Yeah.
I got you. What's you guys' favorite scene in this movie? Gordon, you first.
When they're on the boat with Captain C's and he's offering them a drink. And it's like, I'll have a lemonade. Yeah, that's good. I'll have a lemonade too. I'll have a lemonade. I'll have a root beer. And Johnny, who's known for, whose main character trait is his use of big words, is like, if it's not too exigent, I would like a glass of milk. I mean, I just love that.
He has that great bump on his noggin moment also, which is just a lovely undercut.
Yeah. Patrick, what's your favorite scene?
The first reel. I think I really like the first reel that just establishes everything in a wonderfully straightforward manner.
Yeah. Alan?
Any scene with darling, gorgeous Robin in it. She was an icon in a lot of, she made appearances in a lot of movies in the 70s, some in the 60s. She was absolutely gorgeous. And she was kind of relegated to playing those kind of roles. But she did it without a complaint, and she did it without reservation. And I think probably my favorite overall scene is on the boat, the whole thing on the boat, because it establishes that sort of pulp action sort of stuff that you get with Doc Savage, the unbelievable feats of strength, the outsmarting of the villains, taking on huge odds and defeating them. All this sort of thing, the sort of proto technology of having, when they jump overboard, they've already prepared because of their superior intellect and sort of anticipation of what's going to happen here with Captain C's. They already have these like aqua lung devices that they have so that they can stay underwater and not be shot at anymore. So all of that sort of the total milieu of that. When I talk about Robin, I'm kind of half joking, but she's also very refreshing to see in it because I've seen in a ton of stuff. She's in Blazing Saddles. So
yeah, I do have a question about the villain, but I'll get to that here in a minute. I love the scene between the actress you just talked about, Robin, and the Doc Savage, where he's telling her, "I won't have somebody I fall in love with used to get." I think that's such a great, serious conversation between two adults. it's one of the best conversations I've seen between a man and a woman in a basically I guess a superhero movie, what you want to call it.
Yeah, one slight thing. That's a different actor. That's Pamela Hennessy. That's Hensley,
okay, sorry.
who was in
Matt
Buck
Houston.
Rogers and Matt Houston. Yeah, she was in Buck Rogers.
Yes,
and Matt
she was
Houston.
in Matt Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, Princess Ardala in Buck Rogers. Beatty.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
No,
it's great, but your point is still made. So
yeah, I love the conversation. It makes it so important because it is.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it
also
does. And at that conversation, I'm thinking about how Doc Savage and his friends are just willing to lay their lives down for one another, and he doesn't want someone he doesn't want to fall in love to somebody who could be used against him.
It's the ethos. It's the character ethos is summarized in that conversation.
Yeah. In the books, it's a little deeper than that because Doc is very neurotic around women. That's his one weakness. He's not
heel. Yes.
Yeah, he's real nervous. He's very, not Jerry Lewis like, but he's very uneasy around women.
Okay, question about the villain. I know this actor doesn't play him. Were they going for a Christopher Lee looking character here?
I think certainly
that genre.
It was written in a way that you could hear Christopher Lee saying any of those lines.
Yeah. I wondered if they had reached out to Lee personally.
The villain is the closest that we're going to get to a Doc's only really recurring villain, a guy named John Sunlight, who is almost Doc's equal, but not. And the two John Sunlight books are excellent. They're great. And Joel, the thing I'll say about these Doc Savage reads, and if you read the Shadow books, you're familiar with that. They're fast reads. I mean, they're maybe 50,000 words. Gordon, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, 15. I know that Lester Dent in his master plot outline, he does 4 sections of like 6,000, 6,500, but for that it would have to be like 15, 20,000.
Yeah.
The two
and they are also available on Audible as audiobooks.
The two longest books I own, that are the longest reads I own, are both the Dark Shadows Day books, and they're worth it. God damn it!
Thank you.
Because the Shadow Pulp I own, you're right. It's not long, but it's worth reading. I mean,
but it's girthy.
Yeah, it's very good.
The idea behind this popular fiction is to be able to turn it out, hopefully with good quality, and much of it is, but to be able to turn it out and to be able to, since it's a lot of these are series books, and even, I mean, to call them pulp is obviously not an insult. It is a style. It is an approach to writing, and it is an approach to plot, making and
a physical description. They were printed on the crappiest paper.
But they were also they were inexpensive books. They were accessible for people to buy. They cost a dime or a quarter, originally, something like that. And even in the 60s and 70s, they only cost 50 or 60 cents a piece.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think, I have to editorialize for a moment. I really think, I guess maybe streaming and stuff from Amazon subscription, Amazon Kindle Instant Reader and stuff like that sort of makes up for it. And there's free stuff on the internet. But I really miss culturally freely available, cheap, good pop culture.
Sure.
Comic books that, to me, comic books went off the rails when they went over 50 cents.
Sure.
And the idea that you could get 2 for $1 still was a value. I mean, even in the age of still only 35 cents, remembering that. And and when these Bantam things for 50 cents, or even on the used market when you could get them, readily
Dime
available.
or quarter or
We
something.
really lost something with that, because now everything's borrowed. You get it, but what are you gonna do? Print it out? No.
It's weird because even something that has become highly collectible as Dark Shadows novels, which are, I mean, they qualify as pulp because of the way they were produced, and also on the material that they were produced. They were produced on acid paper and everything else, and the originals now it's difficult to find that don't have browning on the pages and so on because of that. But the aftermarket price used to be, when I first started collecting them in the early 90s, I guess, when I started getting back into Dark Shadows, you could get them for $1 or $2 a piece.
Yeah.
Sometimes $5 for the later ones that only had one printing. But now, forget about it.
Yeah.
It's like you say, it's not readily available anymore. It costs you money to get it. It costs you as much as anything else, any other, reasonably collectible period pulp novel, which they're pretty expensive now. So
sometimes too, even with online shopping, sometimes too you do got to roll the dice and maybe try either an antique shop or a flea market or two.
That's how I got them the first time, and then that dried up around me. I mean, when I was
it's tough too, because I mean, finding a flea store or library is great, but there's also this there's this idea of you got to have the first, you got to have the latest, you got to have everything, and it's like let me give you an example. I have this. I was given this as a birthday present from a friend last year.
Nice.
A friend who is a performer, and who I believe, Jewel, you once referred to as a stripper. So I think you owe her an apology. But most people would be tearing this out of the packet. I haven't, not because I don't want to deal with it, but it's because it feels more pristine. You've got a whole movement of people, with technology, people are like, they're looking at Windows 11 with all the weird AI stuff, and they're like, and the privacy issues, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to switch over. There are more people who are thinking, I'll just buy an older computer, slap Linux on it, and use that, because they realize it's cheaper. There's a lot more ideas around, there's a lot more about physical media now that, like, you've got executives for major studios saying, oh, we're going to get rid of stuff. I mean, there's a reason why Tubi's become very popular, and it's not just because it's free.
Right.
They've really become a huge, huge collection for all sorts of media.
It is a repository. It's a real repository these days. But this came out less than 20 years ago now. And when it came out, it was limited edition and cost $50.
Right.
And now they try to eBay them for upwards of $400, $500, $600 a piece. Now, obviously,
really?
I didn't pay that much for this. No, I did not pay this
Would
much.
you
Yeah,
be
I
willing to
had
sell your soul?
bought them for $52, I think, something like that. And I bought two of them, the Quentin one and the modern Barnabas one. And then a few years later, I sold them. And I mean, when I say a few years later, I mean like 3 years later. I sold them and made over $300 a piece on them. So this is a rebuy. I got a hell of a deal on that. I was no way in hell I was going to pay that kind of money for it. But that's what is happening with aftermarket prices in collectibles now. It doesn't even have to be that old, and the price skyrockets on it because they're artificially rare.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's happening to the really old stuff too, I think. I mean, if you're getting a first edition pulp, sometimes you can get them for a decent price, but then there'll be certain ones in the series that cost a ridiculous amount of money in order to complete your series. So, and I think it's worthwhile because this stuff is of a genre it's an important genre, both in popular culture and in storytelling, American storytelling in particular, the pulp novel. And there are several eras of it. We talked about this before, the dime novel of the 1800s, all the way on up through the Depression era and into this, the 50s, 60s, and 70s with what exploitation novels and detective novels and all these wonderful genres. So there's a great deal of stuff out there, and it's historically, culturally important stuff, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was just like Googling some stuff. Actually, if you're looking for like pulps that aren't like too terribly expensive, we have the Shadow Dark Avenger, which is $6.99. We have the
That's
Shadow
not a pulp.
History. Oh,
That's
sorry.
not a pulp.
Oh, sorry.
Dark Adventure and Man of Mystery are both nonfiction works about the Shadow by Will Murray.
Okay.
But we're talking about the actual magazines because you
Like the original.
Yeah, because like the originals, you to try to find one in halfway decent condition is a challenge. You can get Steger Books and some other companies do what are known as facsimile editions, which are they're like basically same size, same shape, better paper for like about $15 a piece.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's a reasonable substitute for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are some on here that aren't like that aren't out of this world crazy. Hitler's Astrologer, one I own, is it's only $20 for the hardcover, which I do own the hardcover. So
some things you can still get for reasonable prices, like I say. But in a series, a lot of times, if you're a collector and you're a completist of a series of these novels, you're going to run into some fairly expensive ones, particularly of the original type.
Well, I'll say that though I feel this is worth what I saw at the store yesterday is worth the price.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the electronics section, and Deep Space Nine was $100, the whole series.
Oh,
but
yeah,
that's you're gonna pay.
Well, that's also how many seasons?
What was this on DVD?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the whole
That's
set.
not a bad price.
That's not a bad price. There's a lot of seasons.
I mean, I paid $100 per season for them when they came out of Best Buy.
Right. Yeah, it's that if you're looking for it, go to your local Walmart. At least that's where I was, and I saw this. I'm thinking, I looked at this. I looked at my wife. I said, "You see that? That is gold sitting right there."
How much was it? Was this $100?
$100 for all the seasons?
The whole series. The whole series as a box set was $100.
It's a marvelous TV series. It's one of the greatest TV series ever made.
Absolutely.
That's a really good price.
And because right next to it was Next Generation. So
not quite as good.
So
not
true.
So
true.
But good, but not quite as good.
Right.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Because I was looking at all the TV series that are like out now that I watched either A in rerun or B watched as I was growing up. And it's like, my God, there's a lot. So, guys, what do you to wrap this up? What do you guys give the Doc Savage movie here?
I'd say an 8, 7 or an 8.
I'll give it an 8.5 because it has personal appeal, but I also I do see the flaws.
Yeah, I'm around that same around an 8 for the same reasons. I think the actors do an admirable job pulling together the genre, and the relationships are strong. All of that stuff is good, but in some respects, again, the inconsistency of some of the writing, the dialogues and stuff that I mentioned before is a little bit flawed. And again, I think too, Gordon, that's probably of its time, as you were saying before. If it come out a little earlier or a little bit later, it would probably have served it a little bit more. So, yeah.
I give this a solid 9 out of 10. It's really, really
Good for
entertaining.
you.
It's entertaining as hell.
It is.
Because I never read the character or watched the character.
You would enjoy them, Joel. You really would. That was where I started with all of this, is that these are fast, fun reads. I would start with The Land of Terror, which I think is maybe the fourth book. Doc is a little more savage in it. He's kind of bloodthirsty. He's throwing some swords around. Yeah, gangsters and dinosaurs. It's a hell of a book.
That's my question I wanted to ask you guys, since you just reminded me of it, Patrick. If there were a Doc Savage movie today, who would you cast as Doc Savage?
Oh my God.
The Rock.
Yeah, because there actually was a Doc Savage, Shane Black produced Doc Savage project with The Rock, proposed a few years ago, but it ended up in development hell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shane Black also had Remo Williams for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And he went on to do Black Adam because of it. There's that. Yeah.
That was a shoulda, coulda, woulda piece right there. That was another example, I think, of DC.
I liked some things in Black Adam.
I liked some things in it too, but it's another example of how DC doesn't promote well. It doesn't.
It's just assholes and elbows.
They
seem to have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, they're the company that looked at David Zaslav and said, "Yeah, we want that guy to run it."
Yeah, and therein lies the rub, and the rub is sandpaper. So yeah,
and really, in my opinion, Black Adam should have been just called Justice Society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would have been very happy if they had done that.
Yep.
Pierce Brosnan's really good in that.
I thought he was too, and then they decide to freaking vaporize him, basically. So it's like, what are you doing?
It does shock you that they do that, though, because it's fucking Pierce Brosnan, you know?
Absolutely.
That's also they just
I could have stood not to have that shock value. Just, sometimes a heroic character deserves a life and not just to be, just snuffed out for the sake of some minor, it's like a lollipop. It's gone in 5 minutes, it's just, it's not a long lasting effect from that. So why do that?
I guess I'm going to go an actor. I like The Rock, but I'm going to go Brolin. I think he'd do a good Doc Savage.
That's a pretty decent choice.
Be a rough and ready Doc Savage for sure.
Yeah. Guys, really, really fun movie. Tomorrow night, Superman 2, the Donner Cut, which I watched today too. I did find this on the National Archives, so you can go watch it. I tagged you guys in it on Facebook.
I encourage you to look at just the beginning of the Crystal edition on YouTube.
Okay.
I watched it. It's sort of a modernized take on Superman 2. But as far as something like that goes, it strikes I think a very good balance. And it deals with events from Superman the movie in a way that, Jewel, to use a word you like, was shocking.
Yeah. It's crazy to think, because it's funny, I was talking pro wrestling with a friend of mine, and I said, I watched a movie I'd never seen today, and in that movie they put all the characters over that they needed to put over, and today's wrestling can't put jack and shit over. It's just insane. Yeah. But you got links to Gordon Dymowski's Amazon page. Sorry, I had to get my wrestling. Links to Patrick McCray's Dark Shadows Day Book of Bow is going to be
Harris.
And link to Alan Gallant's YouTube channel. Collins Sport After Dark is going to be in the description box. Guys, you have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Peace, love, love.
Take care.